All of those things are critically important. But what they don't think about is privacy. And privacy is the foundation of all of the personal data you collect, from the time you collect it to the time you destroy it. When I ask vendors in particular, and I grill them about their privacy programs, and if I ask a privacy question and I get a security answer, I know right away I don't want to work with that vendor because they don't understand the foundation of privacy. Privacy and security are aligned, and they have to work closely together, but they are not the same things. Before you even look at assessing the security of a product, you need to look at the privacy, because if they can't pass the privacy due diligence test, I don't care if they can do security.
You can secure stolen data, but if you had no legal right to collect it, then all the encryption in the world is not going to protect you. Most people think privacy is just about rules, but my guest today, Sheila Fitzpatrick, knows it's about identity, culture, and power. She's navigated privacy laws in over 160 countries and shaped global laws, stood firm in boardrooms long before people could spell GDPR. She just doesn't follow regulation, she writes it. And as AI explodes, she's watching the world repeat its worst mistake just faster. Sheila, thank you so much for joining me here on Between Us, and welcome to my show. I'm so excited to talk about this topic because it is the need of the hour and for years and months to come.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It is a pleasure. So Sheila, let's just dive right in. Let's start with companies and what they are still getting wrong. Why do you say that privacy and security, they're fundamentally different, and are we dangerously confusing them?
Absolutely. And that's one of my big issues that I talk about all the time. People that have heard me speak at conferences or, to boards or whoever I speak to, one of the issues is companies always think about security. They think about locking down the data, making sure encryption's in place, making sure they have firewalls, making sure people use passwords, multi-factor identification. All of those things are critically important. But what they don't think about is privacy. And privacy is the foundation of all of the personal data you collect, from the time you collect it to the time you destroy it. And if you're only thinking about security, what you're doing in effect is locking down data you may not legally be able to have. So I always use the analogy of a basketball or any kind of wheel. And if you think about privacy as the wheel, as I said, it's the full life cycle of that personal data. One spoke on that wheel is security. It's a very, very important spoke. But if you're only focused on that one spoke and you're ignoring the privacy due diligence, what data are you collecting? What are the laws and regulations around the collection of the data? Where are you storing the data? What are you using as your lawful basis for collecting that data? Who has access to the data? How long are you maintaining it? So records management is a component.
Yes.
If you're only thinking about security, that wheel's not going to turn because in effect, you've ignored all the other spokes on the wheel, so it's broken.
But and hearing you speak, because I say this often, I come from Bay Area tech companies, and I used to do marketing primarily focused on the security solution line. So it's always, to what you said, remediating threats. We're going to secure your environment, and these are all of the solutions we can provide. And I have to be very careful not to let it slip out because I don't want to find myself in a pickle. But it wasn't ever focused on privacy.
No, that's very true. And, I work with a lot of technology companies. I work with companies in all industries, but it's very true. The security is always the one that organizations are focused on, even individuals. When I ask vendors in particular, and I grill them about their privacy programs, and if I ask a privacy question and I get a security answer, I know right away I don't want to work with that vendor because they don't understand the foundation of privacy. Privacy and security are aligned, and they have to work closely together, but they are not the same thing.
So it's like the privacy is the forgotten stepchild.
Pretty much so. Absolutely. And I always think of privacy, in reality, when you're talking about purely personal data, which is what privacy is about, security really isn't going to be important if you haven't focused on the foundation of privacy. What good is it going to do you to lock down data you shouldn't have?
Why do we conflate the two?
because everything's always been focused on security, and privacy has always been that's an impediment to doing business. Or again, there has been very few people that really understand the difference. And so even when you talk to very, very influential companies and very intelligent individuals who build technology,
Yes.
they think about security.
Yes.
Nobody ever thinks about privacy.
Yes, and I can attest to it because I've worked with these companies as well. So I have seen it firsthand. Privacy is not even a topic that is at the table.
Yeah. Or they think it's at the table, but it's embedded in security. So
Yes.
when you say, do you do your privacy impact assessments? I get the responses, oh, yeah, absolutely. We look at the security. I said, no, that's what I'm asking you. I'm asking you if you do your privacy impact assessments. That's different than a security impact assessment. And they look at me like I have three heads.
I literally was just going to look at you. They look at you probably with the most confusing look and probably think, can this woman just get back to what we need her to do?
Exactly. They sit there and say, it's another document we have to do. I said, it should be the first document you do. Before you even look at assessing the security of a product, you need to look at the privacy, because if they can't pass the privacy due diligence test, I don't care if they can do security, but I'm not going to use you if you can't address privacy.
You're one of the few voices that are this vocal about it.
But you're pretty obnoxious about it.
And
it is my pet peeve. It's my passion as well.
I was going to say, I'm so grateful because we need it. Every day our privacy is being violated. Absolutely. And we'll get to the privacy exhaustion portion in a bit. But, oftentimes company also will say, we keep your data safe. But when we hear statements like this from companies, should we be asking perhaps a different question, as in, why do you need to collect it to begin with?
That's the key question. Absolutely. And individuals actually think that, well, if they're asking for it, I guess I have to provide it. And I always say, no, you don't have to provide it.
But we're so conditioned. Like anytime you open up a web browser or go to a site, you have to just basically agree to whatever's on the box just to be able to view or browse. It's exhausting now.
Which is actually a violation of data protection laws, except in the U.S., is that you can't force someone to consent, because if you're going to use consent as your lawful basis, so you say, okay, I'm going to obtain the consent of the individual to process personal data, but you force them to give consent, that's not a valid consent. And it's interesting. I just had that experience. I was just in Lake Como for the Cybersecurity Woman of the World Award, and I checked into the hotel, and they wanted my passport. And I said, I'll show you my passport, but you can't take a copy of my passport. And they looked at me and they said, well, of course we can. I said, no, what do you need a copy for? You just have to identify that I'm the person who's checking in. You need to validate that I am who I say I am. So I'm going to show you my passport. And they said, no, we have to have a copy. It's for your security and mine. I said, it's not for my security. You having a copy of my passport is not for my security. But so then I said, well, where's your privacy statement? So, of course, they pull up. This woman thought I was crazy because she said I'd never been asked for that before. So she had to go get her supervisor. And it was a very well-known, international hotel chain. Mm-hmm. She came back and she had, on the iPad, read the privacy statement. And then it says, accept or decline. And I said, well, I'm declining because I don't want you to have a copy of my passport. Mm-hmm. She goes, well, if you decline, then we can't check you in. I said, well, then why are you asking for my consent? That's not the lawful basis, because you're forcing me to give my consent.
Yes.
So why are you asking me for consent? And she was just totally floored. I said, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be difficult, but this is an EU country. There are data protection laws.
Going to get to that. This is EU. There was a GDPR frenzy about getting their privacy laws in order in 2018, because I was at one of the SaaS companies here in the United States, and we had markets and our counterparts, and we were pulling a lot of midnight hours to make sure that all of our brochures and ebooks were compliant with the new GDPR laws being rolled out. Okay. So it's interesting that they would, you had that experience, given that EU has been leading the charge with these privacy laws. US has always been, a little bit behind, if not a lot behind.
Absolutely. I was stunned. Of course, the hotel chain is a US-based multinational hotel chain. So I would sit there and I said, but you still have to comply with
They still have to
with the
comply because they're
GDPRs. It's
operating in the EU right
yeah,
now.
it's
irrespective-
extraterritorial.
Yes.
Exactly. Plus, I'm also an EU citizen because I have Irish citizenship and US, and it was my Irish passport. So I was like, whoa, wait a minute. So it's very interesting. So I run into this quite a bit, and people. They do look at me like I'm crazy because the poor woman behind the desk, and I was being nice about it. Poor woman, she goes, I've never had anyone ask me this before. And I thought, that's kind of sad.
So no unawareness.
Yeah, we are so conditioned to just
Yes.
turn over these documents. So then I said, okay, since you have to have it, how long are you going to maintain it? So when I check out, are you going to guarantee that you're going to destroy my data, delete my data? She goes, well, I guess so. I don't know. So it ended up where I didn't give my passport. They ended up just looking at it and verifying it, but they didn't make a copy of it. So I sort of won that battle.
But Sheila, it goes back to as recent as what the whole globe has lived through, the pandemic, and they have also said that now we now need to collect this information to be able to do tracing.
Yeah.
So there's that added layer. So people feel, okay, well, I'm trying to be a good citizen and do my due diligence by abiding. Because if something happens, I have been now somebody who has been helpful because, they can trace back and whatever the scenario may be at that time. But I did my due diligence at the cost of giving away your data.
Exactly. Because we, as you said, we are so conditioned to do that. And so I try to educate organizations and individuals. No, you need to ask the questions. You need to ask, why do you need this? What are you going to use it for? How long are you going to maintain it? If it doesn't make sense to you, don't provide your data. Because once that data is in the system, you can say you're going to delete it all you want. But as you know, technology, you can't completely erase that data. It's going to be somewhere.
It's living somewhere in the cloud.
Exactly. And then when we find out about it is when there's a security breach that turns into a massive data privacy violation.
Yes. So, using your example of your experience at in Italy, when we have when the borders are blurred, right, and cultural norms start to diverge, who then really owns the data?
That's an interesting question because the answer is the individual always owns his or her data. It's never owned by the organization that's collecting it. And that's another area where organizations have a misunderstanding. They think that once they're in possession of that data, they own it. They are stewards of that data, where they are given the data for a certain lawful reason, whether it's you have a legal obligation to collect the data or there's a contractual obligation to collect the data, but they never own it. And HR is a perfect example. HR never owns the personal data of their employees. They are stewards of that data. They are responsible for using that data in a compliant manner and in an upfront and transparent manner. They're certainly responsible for securing that data, but they never own it. It always belongs to the individual.
If it belongs to the individual, let me take it a bit further. When we have these data breaches, our data is compromised, but furthermore, our information is always being sold.
Exactly. That's how a lot of companies make money. It's selling
Yes.
data. Yeah.
Yes.
And that's where they
So we
understand.
don't own it. The organizations say we don't own it, but on the back end, when we're consenting to something, say I agree, or when you're in a hurry and you want to accept all the cookies just to get to an information that you need at your fingertips, they're using that information to sell to other people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Even though they will say in many ways, oh, no, we never sell your data. It's like, oh, yes, you do. And unfortunately, people don't read the terms and conditions. Like I'm anal about that. I read the terms and conditions and I send letters to the companies saying, I can't agree to this. I can't agree to that. I redline the things because we so freely give it up. And even as something as simple as, when you go to doctor's office.
Yes.
And they want your driver's license, your social security number, and all of this. And I finally said, you know what? The only thing you need from me is my insurance, so it's covered payment. You need to validate I am who I am, so you need to see my driver's license. You don't need to have in your system my driver's license number. There's absolutely no reason for it. There's no reason for you to have my social security number at all, unless it's tied to my insurance. Then I can understand that. But some of the data they ask for, we don't even question. Now, I do question, but most people just sign it away.
So I fall in your bucket where I question a lot of things, and I guess you could lightly say put up a fight. People would say that
Yeah.
would the receiver would think that I'm putting up a fight, but it's when we ask questions that are out of curiosity and wanting to find out why you need X, Y, and Z, then sometimes it's not received well. And there, to your point, been a lot of discourse about the doctor one is a fantastic example because they want everything and anything out of you. Similarly, same now with banks. When you even go to, okay, I understand with banks they need certain information, but it's also goes back to even wanting something that you own. They want basically the information from when you were born till the present day, just to get your hands on something that you're owning. And that's scary. So how do we navigate our way forward from here, Sheila? Because these practices are already in place and they're dictated by organizations that we unfortunately depend on.
Exactly. Well, it's going to take a lot of education. It's going to take a lot of pushback from individuals to say, no, we have to learn to stand up for our rights when it comes to owning our personal data, the use of that data. If a company and organizations can be transparent about why they need data and what they do with it, we're going to be more likely to say, okay, I understand that. That makes sense. I'll share that data. But the answer is always, well, because we've always collected it, or because we need it for it's a benefit to you. Now, that's not a benefit to me. It gives you a better user experience. I'm not looking for a better user experience, so why would I give you that data? So it's educating people to say, you don't have to always say yes. If there is no legal and relevant need to collect that data, don't provide that data. And don't be afraid to say no, because it's your data.
Okay, so using that example, if some things are now becoming obsolete, let's take a very simple example of a retail experience.
Yeah.
We go to purchase something and they say, we don't do paper receipts anymore, we'll email you. And now you're exchanged your email address, and that also comes with more components about your identity and your data. How do we work our way around this?
That's a big issue. I still force them to give me a paper receipt. I know I'm killing trees, but I still force them to give me a paper receipt because I said, no, I don't want you. When they say, can I get your phone number and email address? I say no. And they say, well, we're not going to use it. I said, then why are you asking for it? So, well, we have to put it in our system. I said, okay, for phone number, put 0000000. If you need a number in there, if your system requires it. But I'm not giving you my email because you're telling me you're only going to use it to send me the receipt, but I know you're going to use it to send me marketing material.
Yes.
I don't want marketing material. And then they said, well, you can opt out later. Because in the U.S., the default is you're opted in until you explicitly opt out.
Yes.
In most countries, it's you're opted out until you explicitly opt in. So the U.S. is different. Everybody talks about, the CCPA in the U.S., in California, it's just like the GDPR. It's like, no, it's not. It's so far from the GDPR, it's not even funny. It's like our default is we're automatically opted in. So I still force for a paper receipt. I said, you can still give me a paper receipt because I'm not giving you my email address.
I default to paper too, and I actually, and I shared this with you, but I'll share it again here, is I had gone to a retail store and they were forcing me to give me an email, and I said, I don't want to do it. Yeah. And I said, please give me a paper receipt. And she said, we can't issue that. I said, yes, you can.
Yeah.
And she got really flustered. And I felt bad because she was, I think, all but 18 to 20 years old. But she got and I just said, just get me a paper receipt. She goes, I don't know how to do that. And I said, okay, then get your manager. I said, I don't visit the store often enough. I've come from far away. I just would like a paper receipt. It's more convenient for me. Yeah. And I think I'd sent her, the poor little girl, into a tailspin that day. But, I think I was just a little bit fascinated by that experience, that me asking for something that is my right.
Exactly.
That I don't want to, I understand that's your company policy. I don't wish to follow it because I know that there is an alternative. And me asking for the alternative, I think seemingly ruined her day.
I know, and you do
and,
feel
and
bad.
I feel awful, but I asked her politely.
Yes.
And I can't help that my request for the alternative sent you into a tizzy. I am not responsible for how you reacted to my alternate request.
Yeah, I always say that too when when I push you back. I said, "Look, I know it's not you, and I'm sorry, and
yes.
I'm not trying to be difficult, but you need to understand." I would say, "I'm a privacy attorney, so of course I'm going to ask for a paper receipt. I'm not going to give you my personal data." And I said, oftentimes I'll say, maybe this is a learning lesson for you too, because maybe next time someone asks you for your personal data, you might want to question and go, "No, I don't think I want to give you that." And unfortunately, I didn't grow up with the digital age. I mean,
Yes.
that's only been in the last, 10, 20 years. And you look at some of the younger people, that are in their late teens, early 20s, they grew up totally in
They
the
don't
digital
know any
age.
different.
No, so they give away all their information, and then they're shocked when there is a breach of information, or they're getting communications and emails and unsolicited marketing that they have no interest in, and they're shocked about that. And I said, well, what do you think? You're giving away your data. And they're so used to putting everything out on social media. Like, the family's going to Hawaii on vacation, and we're going to be gone for 2 weeks. And then they come home and they've been robbed. Well, what do you think? Like, do you think about, if you want to advertise that you're going on vacation, do it when you get back.
Yeah.
Like, we just got back from vacation. But don't do it before you go.
I was guilty of that when I was much younger, but I've gotten smarter too. And also, for me, it's a little bit more layered. One, safety.
Yeah.
Two, is just wanting to have the ease of not having to have everybody be aware of their surroundings. And I think we have gotten so comfortable in knowing where you are. And even with friends and families, sometimes you have to exercise those boundaries because sometimes people feel personally offended. Like, oh, you didn't tell me you were going on vacation? No, because you weren't part of it.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
Unless we had plans and I went on vacation and I said, oh, sorry about the lunch. I'll get back at you when I'm, in town. It never comes to that. I'm very cognizant when I'm navigating my way. So I think it's fascinating that, with the privacy and when you layer in all these different components, how it impacts other people's emotions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, it's funny. My family can't keep track of me because I live. And people ask me where I live. I say United Airlines because I am always traveling. Actually, one of my brothers texted me this morning and he goes, "What country are you in now?" So they know that I'm traveling. So they don't even try to keep up with where I am. But they don't get offended because they know I travel nonstop. And one of my nephews is actually the director of digital marketing at a very large multinational company in Silicon Valley. So poor thing, he never tells me what he's doing because I'm like, you're doing what?
Yeah.
The poor marketing people are the ones that really get hit with the privacy regulations.
I can attest to that as well.
Exactly.
I have been there. But Sheila, let's for a moment talk about GDPR. First, I'm going to have you define it. And why is it so different than what we here in the United States have? And do we have an equivalent? I believe I heard you use an acronym. So if you could define both of them separately and then also the differences.
Sure. So the GDPR is the General Data Protection Regulation that the EU released in 2018. Mm-hmm. And it replaced the previous directive on the protection of personal data. In the EU, the fundamental right to privacy and the protection of your personal data and ownership of your data has always been in place. It's always been part of the laws and human rights. And the GDPR, why it became such a big issue for companies around the world, it was the first extraterritorial regulation that protected personal data. And what I mean by that is, even if you did not have a presence in an EU country, an EU member state, it belonged to at that time the 28 member states before the UK left. And if you, for instance, were a company in the Silicon Valley and you had locations around the world but no locations in Europe, but you still had customers or employees located in Europe, you were impacted by the GDPR. If you processed the personal data of an EU resident, so if you had a website where EU residents could go to and they enter their personal data, you were caught up by the GDPR. So it became a major issue because organizations weren't used to having to comply with laws where
Yeah.
they had no presence. And so it became a huge issue. Pros and cons, pro being, it was absolutely fundamentally a law that protects individuals and gives them ownership of their own data. It made companies stand up and take notice and formulate a real respect for personal data. Sort of the negatives were everybody jumped on the bandwagon, and people that were technology experts overnight were now privacy experts. And I'm like, really? How'd you become a privacy expert overnight? The acronym I referred to in earlier was the CCPA.
Yes.
That's the California Consumer Protection Act. Now, California was one of the first states that introduced a data protection regulation. A lot of people tried to turn that into, what I mean by a lot of people, a lot of consulting firms, a lot of law firms tried to turn that into, oh, it's the new GDPR. It's going to be the biggest, legislation since 2018. No, it's not. It's, and fundamentally, it's a step in the right direction.
Yes.
So we had the CCPA that came out, and then CPRA was the California Consumer Privacy Rights. And that sort of now has been embedded in the CCPA, because CCPA was just for consumers, and the CPRA now includes some employees, not all. It is not as aggressive. It is not as substantial as the GDPR. The default, as I mentioned earlier, is you're opted in until you explicitly opt out. The lawful basis aren't as restrictive as what you find under the GDPR. And there is a board that sort of oversees it, but most companies don't even comply with the CCPA. Here it's not entirely effective. There's not a lot of what I'd say investigations and enforcement going on. The sanctions aren't as great as what you'd find under the GDPR. So under the GDPR, a sanction for a serious violation can be up to 4% of your global annual turnover, your global annual revenue, which can be absolutely substantial. And what happens is it can be up to 4%. It's either 2% or 10 million or 4% and 20 million, whichever is higher. So even small companies are caught up under the GDPR. There's no exemptions for small businesses, whereas with the CCPA, there are certain exemptions that are out there. So it's a lot of the new legislation around the world, especially in Asia Pacific, which is the fastest growing region right now with data protection laws, have modeled their legislation after the GDPR, but made it more restrictive.
And I was going to ask you, in hearing you speak about California and how they have modified it to now include employees, why there's so much that comes out of California in terms of we lead in a lot of things.
Oh, absolutely.
So we lead, yet we lead with so many loopholes.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And the reason for that, obviously, is because a very large percentage of California's revenue comes from high-tech companies. And so we have very, very aggressive lobbyists that lobby on behalf of the organizations. They don't want to have more restrictive data protection laws. That's going to impede their business. And so, we sort of put little caveats around the law, or we look good in terms of, we have privacy legislation now, and there's 20 states in the U.S. that now have privacy legislation, but they're nowhere near what you see in Europe or Asia or even Canada. Latin America is growing when it comes to data protection laws. The U.S. is so far behind, and again, a lot of it is because we are a business-driven country as opposed to an individual-driven country.
But in hearing you speak, if we focus on Southeast Asia and even Africa, that is, Southeast Asia has always been growing, but they're growing at a different and rapid pace now. So how, with those countries, there's also a lot of, let me find the right words, sometimes navigating a lot more murky murkier waters on the back end. So if they can get as stringent, then why can't we?
That's always the $1,000,000 question. And
Yeah.
I really wish we could change it. There's a lot of talk around it. I think one of the biggest factors, and by no means do I want to condemn people that go into lobbying. That's, for them, that's a great career to go into. But we have very, very substantial lobbying going on in the U.S. that impacts our laws. And when companies are paying hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars, to lobbyists to fight against legislation or fight in favor of certain legislation, you don't see that in other countries. There isn't the presence of the lobbyists that we see in the U.S. And so that's why, we sort of put Band-Aids on things, but we really never put substantial legislation in place that protects personal data.
So at the end of the day, every single time, it is the average consumer, the person getting hurt at the hands of capitalism.
That's a good way to put it. I mean, I'm not anti-capitalism, but that's a
that's a
very good way of putting it.
And I see the benefits of it, but I think in recent times with the discourse, it's really hard not to see and call it out.
Yes. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I've never really heard it positioned that way, but you're absolutely right. I mean, we do, we put a lot of stock into our businesses in terms of, we want to be the best and the brightest in the world, and we want to have the best technology, we want to be ahead. We don't think about individuals' personal data. We don't think about privacy rights. We don't think about consumer rights. The philosophy sort of for a lot of companies is, we're doing this for your benefit. We're giving you a better product. We're giving you a better user experience. We're making it easier for you to navigate our websites by collecting the data, so the next time that you enter the website, your data's already there. A lot of people like that. I don't like that.
I don't like that either.
I don't mind typing in my data. I don't want you to pre-populate my data.
Yep.
So, we do give up a lot of our freedoms in the way companies look at it. You give up a lot of your freedoms to get more benefits. They wouldn't call it giving up your freedoms. They would call it sharing your information in order to get a better user experience.
And I think it's so important to, when you said the word freedom, because I'm going to just leave it there because it can quickly grow a limb of its own and go in a different direction, and we're not here for that. We're here to talk about privacy and security. So in your travels, because you have traveled extensively, where have you seen, for instance, Global South pushing back, or perhaps innovating privacy frameworks that deserve a little extra attention and something that we here in the United States can learn from?
So I'm seeing, you're right, there's a big push to go to digital and not have any, paper identity. I am seeing more, I mean, that's a difficult question to navigate, because I wouldn't say anyone's doing it really, really well right now, but they're going in the right direction. I'm seeing more privacy notices when you board a plane now and they're doing the facial recognition. So this, about a year ago, is when I first realized it was starting to happen more and more, especially in the States, like flying out of, SFO. And they'd have to do, you stand up, they take a picture. I actually asked the question, well, what are you doing with my picture? Where are you storing it? How long are you keeping it? Is this going to go in a database somewhere? Again, they look at me like I'm crazy. And I said, well, I just want to know, because you just started this today. You're taking my picture. I don't know what you're doing with it. So we discussed that. A week later, when I was flying out again, I saw a sign up right next to, very clearly, very visible, right next to the camera, that it said, and this was United Airlines. United Airlines is taking your picture. It will be deleted at the end of 12 hours. And so
that's amazing.
So it was the first time I actually went, wow, this is really cool. They're actually saying exactly what they're doing. And I was shocked that it was in the U.S. that I saw it. And then certainly I see it more. I go back and forth to Ireland quite a bit. And in Ireland, I see a lot of notices around where it's, you see facial recognition is in process. You can call this number to find out more about it. Or they'll say the information will be deleted within 24 hours. So I am seeing more of that happening.
At least you know that your information isn't going to live within their systems for the rest of its life. After a few 24 hours, 48 hours, it's gone.
Yeah, well, that's what we're hoping because that's what they're saying.
I
So we have
know.
to believe them. But I'm starting to see more of that where they're actually, pushing back. Well, the people are pushing back so that the organizations are now starting to pay attention. Australia is doing a lot with the digital
Australia
ID
really
market.
is.
They're
Yes.
doing an awful lot there. Their privacy law isn't as restricted as the GDPR by any means. They don't have an adequacy rating, but they really do care about the fundamental right to privacy, and so they are really being very careful, especially with the healthcare space. They're moving into more of a digital sort of record, healthcare record. And they're taking into consideration a lot of things like where's that data going to be stored? It's supposed to be on-prem in Australia. Now, if it's in the cloud, it's not going to be on-prem in Australia,
Yeah.
even though the data center might be there. But they're really doing more in terms of asking the right questions, which I think that's where you start. Whenever you're going to use digital ID, whether it's you're going to use iris scanning or fingerprinting or whatever it is, your digital footprint, start by asking the questions. Why are you using it? What are you using it for? Where is it going to be stored? How long is it going to be maintained? Who's going to have access to it? Do you want to control it internally? Do you want to rely on a third party? What do your contracts look like? So there are steps to be taken to start to protect that digital identification.
I think it's fascinating, and thank you for that input about Australia, because Australia likes to take a lot of they look at US for guidance, right?
Yes.
And I say this because I've been going to Australia religiously for well over 15 years. So I've seen the development of the highways and everything.
I spent a lot of time in Australia. As a matter of fact, at the end of the month, I'll be in Sydney. And they are really starting, whenever they say, well, we look at what the U.S. does, I go, don't look at what the U.S. does.
They say US, they say US is the big brother.
Yeah, and I go, no, don't do that. Look at what the other countries in the Asia Pacific region are doing,
Yes.
or look at the GDPR. They are being influenced now by what's going on in like Singapore and in Thailand, Philippines that have implemented more restrictive data protection laws. They also look at a lot at South Africa that has a very restrictive data protection law. South Korea has the most restrictive data protection law in the
Yes.
world. It's not Europe. They also look at Europe.
What are your thoughts? Let me just pause for a moment and ask you about the UK and digital passport, or is it digital ID
The digital
to
ID.
work?
Yeah, it's a very difficult one. I'm not a big proponent of having solely digital ID. I think people need to have an option whether or not they want to have, a paper or plastic if you want your driver's license or whatever. The UK has changed recently. I mean, since they have the new regulator that's been in place a couple of years, he came from New Zealand. And since the Brexit, they even more so. They have in many ways minimized their data protection law. It's still restrictive. They still have an adequacy with the EU, but they're pushing the envelope where they're trying to be more business friendly and giving more latitude to the businesses, and they're it's almost in some ways stripping away the privacy rights, not completely. And I do a lot of work in the UK, and I love going to the UK, so I don't want to badmouth them by any means, but I see it. It's like a slow step backwards from when they were under the GDPR. So the UK Data Protection Act, their GDPR, is not quite as restrictive as the EU GDPR, and I've seen changes, and it's making me a little bit nervous. And I hope that they start to put the brakes on and kind of rethink what they're doing, because they're giving a lot of latitude to organizations to collect data.
And I am on the same page with you, where I am not a big proponent of when I heard the UK digital ID to work. And just a couple of days ago, I heard someone say, well, I am an entrepreneur. I don't need to comply with this. And I believe it was somebody from either a local branch of the government saying, but you do. And he said, it doesn't impact me. And she couldn't answer this person effectively as to why you need it, other than saying, because essentially I said so.
Yeah. which is not a good answer, and it's not going to give people a comfort zone, but that happens a lot. You look at that, legislators make laws that they're exempt from, which is incredibly frustrating. And the digital ID, in many ways, they thought it'd be easier for people because they said, oh, some people can't get access to, their driver's license, or passport or something. But how, if they can't get access to paper, how are they going to get access to a computer to be able to get their digital ID? I mean,
Right.
the logic doesn't really make sense there. And even when you mentioned the real ID in California, in
Yes.
the U.S.,
In the US now, yeah.
you need the real ID. I don't have the real ID because I don't want to have to get my driver's license isn't up for renewal yet, but I use my passport. So why are you forcing people to get a real ID if you can also use your passport? So you had all these people in a panic
Yes.
that they had to meet this deadline, which then again, they pushed out the deadline, but now it's in place. You have people running out to get their digital ID. And I said, don't you have a passport? They said, yeah, you can use your passport. You don't have to get a real ID.
But they use fear-based tactics to get people into action for a bigger picture that sometimes isn't unveiled to us until much later. Sheila, when systems are designed, for example, in Silicon Valley, but implemented in Lagos or Jakarta, who really gets to define the default citizen?
Well, it's interesting because, again, that goes back to what we're talking about, the GDPR. So if you're in the Silicon Valley and you're designing a system that is going to be global, you are responsible as a developer of that system to design it where it can comply with the laws and legislation in the various countries. So when we're talking about privacy legislation, if you're developing a technology, say an AI technology, which everyone's into today, you have to make sure that as the company that's developing it, that privacy is part of the plan, security is part of the plan, that the Global Data Protection Officer or your external privacy counsel, whoever you use, needs to be involved in the development stage to define what you can and cannot do, because you can't build privacy into the product after the fact. It has to be part of the initial planning stage. And I always tell my clients, if you're a global company, you don't want to manage privacy piecemeal. You don't want to build a product for the US and build a different product for Canada and a different product for Asia and a different product for Europe. You want one product, one privacy program. So my default is you look at what your risk profile is, your risk tolerance. You build your program or your product, whatever it is you're developing. If we're talking about a privacy program, develop it based on the most restrictive data protection law that your organization can handle and adhere to, because you can't manage it piecemeal. So most of my clients will use GDPR as the foundation and then build on top of that. So I go, don't build anything less than the GDPR. If you start with the GDPR, at least you've met 98% of the laws around the world.
Great advice.
It's always do that. Even if at this point in time, you're only operating, say, in North America, at some point in time, if you plan on growing, you don't want to have to scramble and go, oh no, now we've got to comply with the UK GDPR. Now we have to comply with the EU. Now we have to comply with the Australia Privacy Act or the China PIPL. So you need to build a global framework, and that's the best way to deal with it. And most of my clients go, I hadn't even thought about that, because I said, you're not going to have someone sitting in every country going,
correct,
well, you have to do this, you have to do this. You need that expert to tell you, if you're building it for a global environment, you need to be able to do X, Y, and Z.
And you don't want to go back to the drawing board. Exactly. So even if you start local, and you're thinking global for big, long term, start with global and then scale back to what you need right now. Because when you scale up, it's less cumbersome for you.
Exactly.
Oh, that's great advice, Sheila.
Because I always tell people, I said, it's too late once you've launched a product in a certain country to go back and go, we forgot about privacy. Now we need to go and, make the default you're opted out until you explicitly opt in. You have to go back and add your privacy statement. You have to go back in and add the transparency. You can't do that once you've already, if you work with third-party providers and you haven't entered into data processing agreements, you can't go back after the fact. Well, you can, but it's very difficult because they're going to go, forget it, I'm not going to sign a data processing agreement. We're already under contract.
So so in this example, if a company has expanded its footprint globally, Can a country still claim sovereignty when its citizen data lives in cloud service beyond its borders?
That's a huge issue with the cloud environment because there's data sovereignty and data residency are becoming a huge issue where countries are very reluctant to have their data stored in a cloud environment where they don't know where the data is.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I always tell my clients is that when you ask the vendor where the data is, the vendor's going to say to you, you pick your data center. Where do you want the data center to be? So for instance, if you're talking about Australia, since we both do business in Australia, if you talk about Australia, healthcare data in Australia has to remain in Australia, has to remain onshore in Australia, data sovereignty regulation. But I said, do you ever ask the question of your provider of the data center is in Australia, but do they have a 24/7 follow the sun support model? They'll say yes. And I said, well, where's the support coming from? They'll say, India or Philippines or somewhere. I'll say, so the data is accessible from India or the Philippines, right? Well, yes. Well, there goes your data sovereignty because that's still considered a transfer. It's not a physical transfer. It's a virtual transfer. Your data is now.
But someone else has access to it that is not part of the
So there goes
country.
your data sovereignty. There goes your data residency because it's now in someone's laptop that they're accessing or their system from wherever they are. So you need to ask the additional questions, not just where's the data center, what data center picks up the load when that data center goes down, where's your support coming from, where's the development coming from. So if you're one of the big multinational cloud providers, most of them are based in the U.S. or headquartered in the U.S. They have operations around the world, but you still know if they're headquartered in the U.S. A lot of that development work is being done in the U.S. So there's still, and a lot of their support is going to be coming out of jurisdictions around the world because the only way you can do a 24/7 follow the sun model is to have call centers and data centers around the world. So your data, although it may be physically residing in a data center in country, it's virtually accessed from outside the country.
With your work across the globe between both private and public sectors, where have you seen tension between wanting digital progress, but yet there's some who are not eager to be digitally colonized, even here in 2025?
That's a great question, and yes, I do see that. I see it so more in the public sector. So government is, even though they're the ones pushing for AI technology and new technology, they're the ones that are the most resistant about embracing some of the new technology because government information is so confidential and so restrictive and they don't care as much about personal data, which drives me insane, but they do care about the proprietary, confidential government information. So I see a lot of the tension there where...
I can see that too.
And especially years ago, when cloud was a thing and everybody was moving to the cloud, and government was the last one to really adopt a cloud model. They sort of went hybrid first where they could control on-prem cloud. Yeah. And so they're always... probably the last to really go fully into new technology. And even though they say they want to, like with digital ID and things, they're the last to really adopt it.
And that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
That makes sense to me. And also when you invest so much with on-prem, and it takes a lot to run those as well. But then I guess you get caught in this conundrum of with natural disasters, I need to secure, and cloud is the best way.
Right.
So which beast do I want to deal with?
Yeah. And a lot of it has to do with control too. They want to be able to control their data and know exactly where it is. And they're not quite as aggressive about going full force into new technology as the private sector is. Private sector looks at it in terms of if it can reduce headcount, if it can, give us a competitive advantage, then we're going to go all in without really weighing the risks.
Okay. If you are, for instance, a refugee displaced by war, born undocumented, or living in a region where the state doesn't recognize your identity, and it's sad for me to even say this out loud here, we sit in 2025, but this is still the reality in some places around the globe. What happens when a machine that we're moving towards is the only way to prove that you exist?
That's a really great question because that one, I don't think anyone has an answer for that right now because if you look at some of these communities and environments in really rural and world countries that don't have access to computers, technology, and they don't have the infrastructure to support,
Yes.
even birth certificates.
Correct.
Trying to get to identify and to claim who you are is next to impossible. Like, you can stand there and physically say, you can see me. I'm a person. I'm here. But you have no way to prove where you were ever born, how you came into this world. There's no paperwork. There's no paper trail. And that's an issue that governments haven't even addressed, haven't really thought about. It's an area where, I guess from a privacy perspective, you have total privacy because nobody knows you exist. But it's scary because you can't get benefits. You can't get work. You can't get passports, visas, anything. It's your entire life is non-existent.
But it's such a disservice to people just because we don't want to get on the bandwagon right now that aid services maybe I wouldn't be able to take advantage or have access to them because you don't have my digital footprint in your system.
Yeah, it's definitely a disservice to them.
So I become, in a way, segregated from the digital footprint society because you don't have a backlog of my data to see whether I deserve X, Y, or Z or not.
Exactly. But you can also see that's kind of a conflict with the privacy issue, which is it's a negative from just overall life experience and be able to exist in this world, and it's in a conflict with the fact that how much digital identity do you really want, because that would infringe on your privacy. So it's really sort of a catch-22. Like, you need to have some footprint, but you need to control that footprint. And you need to own that footprint, not rely on a company to own that footprint.
So then, would it be fair to say that in the future, governments can use digital ID as a feature, not as a bug, and as a quiet way to control who gets access to resources?
Yeah, I think that's a very fair statement. Absolutely.
That's wild.
It is wild, isn't it? Yeah.
Scary times. Exciting and also scary times. Especially, people like you and I are, we're on board with a lot of things, but we also look at it from a lens of curiosity and asking the rightful questions of what are the trade-offs and what are the long-term implications, and being at the forefront of being able to champion for people who are not asking these questions. Because sometimes by the time you get to asking the questions, it's a little bit too late.
Exactly. And I always tell people, I am not anti-technology at all. I mean, technology is what drives this world, and there are so many benefits. But being able to educate people, like you're saying, educate people around privacy and their fundamental rights to own and control what can be done with their data and how much they're willing to share that information, and just transparent. The key thing for me is transparency. Just tell me why you need my data and what you're going to do with it. Be open and honest. What third parties do you do business with that are going to have access to my data? If you're open and honest with me, I'm going to trust you. And trust is the biggest factor when it comes to your personal data and the access to that personal data. Without trust and transparency, there's nothing.
But transparency is a beautiful marketing word we like to throw around.
Yes. The other one is, we comply with all applicable data privacy laws. Like, really? How do you do that?
And you just say, I agree, and off you go.
Exactly.
If your existence, Sheila, is just reduced to data, and the system no longer recognizes you as valid, then whose humanity is the future actually being built for?
It's for technology. It's not for individuals. The future is being built for high-tech companies that can build these fantastic robots that can take over the world and replace human beings. We're already seeing that happen.
So would you say then, as we move toward a worldwide privacy, are we moving towards a worldwide privacy standard or further fragmentation?
Further fragmentation. I think we are. I mean, and if I look at the U.S. as an example, so if I take the rest of the world, carve sort of the U.S. and sort of maybe some third world countries out of it, I think there's going to be more of a symmetry around data protection laws. I think they're going to be more aligned. As I mentioned earlier, people, organizations and countries are using the GDPR as the foundation. I think U.S., it's becoming more fragmented, and we're getting further away from looking really at privacy because we're so many organizations are all in on the technology first, especially with the push for AI. Now, I'm not saying AI is bad. There are some phenomenal things you can do with AI, but there are also some pretty scary privacy issues when it comes to AI. If you're not doing your privacy due diligence, and if you're not asking the right questions before you start, building or deploying AI, you're going to have some issues. And I think right now in the US, or in maybe North America in general, organizations are just going 100% full into the AI, and they're not even thinking about the privacy ramifications, and they're not looking at the risk mitigation.
So if we're becoming more fragmented, is there a path in the future towards convergence where we can have a global compliance norm?
I would hope so. That would be certainly something that I would push for, and I work with
That
organizations.
sounds like wishful thinking to me.
But it is wishful thinking. It definitely is. It's because, again, technology is moving faster than the laws. And what's happening is people get so excited about new technology. And again, I'm not anti-technology. I mean, I think technology is incredibly
and we have to
important.
embrace it. It's the way of the future.
Absolutely. But the more that we start to just go feet first into technology, privacy is getting pushed further and further to the back. So the convergence is not, it's kind of like we're passing each other in the night. The technology is moving, 1,000 miles an hour, and privacy is moving 10 miles an hour, because there's those of us that are out there screaming and pushing and passionate about privacy, and yet you still got the technology people going, but this is so cool, and it can do so many fabulous things. And I say, yeah, it can do some really fabulous things, but also can do some really scary things.
Yeah.
So let's talk about it again. Bring your data protection officer into your planning phase so that you can get the risk on the table and mitigate them up front. I was just in Heathrow Airport, and they had these pictures on the wall at the gates of two exact identical pictures. And underneath them it said, which one is AI? And that actually freaked me out more than...
Were you able to identify it correctly?
No.
I'm passing those tests, I think, with about 90% accuracy. So I'm quite proud of myself.
Very good. Because I was looking, I go, this scares me more than anything.
Yep.
Because why would I want some technology to be able to imitate me? And we're seeing that happen. So that, that sort of scares me a little bit.
Because it goes into a violation of so many of our privacy and just bleeding into our life.
Absolutely. That's where we get into identity theft.
Yes.
That's where, people are starting, fake. Where there's a lot of fake identities out there. There's a lot.
Yep.
I read this article where this woman was actually conned out of her entire life savings because AI had basically imitated her grandson's voice, and he called her asking for money. He was in trouble, and she gave her entire life savings away. Her grandson didn't even know about it.
That's terrible.
It's horrible.
But you hear, that is one example. You hear stories like this every day.
Every day. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, you have to balance the good with the bad and mitigate those risks so that we can take advantage of AI technology.
It goes back to your point at the top of the show, which was ask the questions, know, and educate yourself, so that if you don't feel comfortable with something, know that you have the right to say, I say no, or no, I do not comply.
Yeah, exactly.
But we're too afraid to do that now.
And that goes back to what I keep saying over and over again. Educate people. Just keep talk. I talk about it whenever I do podcasts or keynote speeches or whatever it is. I say, ask the questions and don't be afraid to say no. If an organization comes back and says, well, we have to have it, and say, okay, explain to me why. And if you can explain to me why, okay, I'll give it to you.
Yes.
But if you just tell me because the system needs it, that's not a valid excuse. The system needs it. Whoever coded that system didn't know privacy.
Yes, yes. Sheila, you have such a plethora of experience spanning decades.
Yeah.
And of course, you work around the globe. But you stepped into this field before it was popular, before it was mainstream, and at a time when women's voices were less accepted or acknowledged in law, tech, and security. Oh, privacy, sorry, let me correct myself.
That's okay.
So, at that time, when you entered your career, what did it take to make people listen to you when the systems around you weren't built for it? And when there weren't many women pioneering and leading the way forward?
Yeah. So I've been doing this for over 40 years. I
my
like to say I started at
gosh.
the age of 5. And yeah, there were very few people in the privacy space at all. I started out in international employment law and immediately got into the privacy space because you can't do employment law in Europe and not, get into privacy, and just fell in love with it because I've always believed in that fundamental right to, your own personal data.
Mm-hmm.
I used to walk down the hallway of organizations and people would walk the other way, especially the marketing department. If I walked in, they'd all walk out. Or I was the person of no, oh no, she's coming to say no. And so the way I always did it, it was more of a passion for me where I would try to explain the importance of privacy. And I'd always say, look, I'm not here to tell you you can't do whatever it is you need to do to make your business work. But let me explain to you how important it is to understand that fundamental right to privacy. And I try to use personal experiences or ask
Mm-hmm.
questions about, do you want to see your data, on a billboard somewhere, or there wasn't
Right.
social media at that time, but do you really want people having access to your personal information that you can't control? And so, I mean, it wasn't easy. I got a lot of pushback, but the one thing I never did, and I always, if I mentor women in particular, I always say, don't change who you are.
But it's
Like,
so easy to when nobody gives you the time of the day or when you don't have a seat at the table, Sheila. So what was your conviction in those hard days?
so it was more because I believe I had information they needed. And I knew that I had information that they needed.
Oh.
And so that's the way I would approach it is I have information that's going to help you. And if it can help give you the competitive advantage, I think you can take 5 minutes. I'll just take 5 minutes of your time and explain to you the importance and why it's important and why privacy can give you the competitive advantage. And this was well before, technology
But
was
where did
taking
this
over.
confidence come from?
Oh, I grew up in a very strong Irish Catholic family that, there are a lot of boys. I have a lot of male cousins and I have brothers. I'm the only girl. And I've always had a voice to stand up for myself. I've never been really shy and retiring. Although I don't like, if I go into like when you go to conferences and you have to go to those cocktail parties I'm never comfortable in that environment. Like when people are in groups, I'm more comfortable talking to 20,000 people and I'm on stage than I am walking in and having to.
That's amazing. Yeah.
But no, I've always believed that you don't have to turn into someone else. Like, I hate to say this, but I've seen a lot of women throughout my career that they've lost who they are and they try to become
Yes.
like their male counterparts. I'm like, you don't need to go in there and start to act like the man. Just be yourself and be who you normally would be anyway, and just believe in your convictions. You can't demand respect. You have to earn respect. And so, I don't want to make it sound like, oh, it was always easy. They always invited me in. No, I mean, I had situations that were difficult, but I do have an Irish temper where I could just feel it coming up. But you just have to bite your lip and just keep on pushing forward,
Right.
knowing that you have value and knowing that your message is going to resonate.
And I asked this, Sheila, because tech and privacy, even when I entered the space, it's very male dominated.
Yeah.
And even today, and I think the data that I have is from 2024, women only make up 22 to 25% of cybersecurity roles globally. And many security teams have no women at all. And so even like a few years ago when I was in an organization, absolutely mind-boggling to me to see the same mindset of the early 2000s of this male-dominated industry. I know everything, and just a boys' frat party.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That still exists today.
I saw it a few years ago,
Yeah.
and I was gobsmacked.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, it still exists today. But what we need and what I'm seeing more of is women need to support women. And, I'll be honest with you. I've had more pushback and more negativity from women than I have from men.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really sad because we should be supporting each other. We shouldn't be competing against each other. We should be helping each other and mentoring each other. But most of the negative pushback and just the obnoxious behavior that I've experienced in my career has been from women.
It's fascinating that you say that because it's something I do want to talk about much later because I experienced the same thing in Bay Area Silicon Valley companies from women. And, usually the marketing is, oh, we're here to champion for you. And I only found that at two places and obviously in much smaller groups coming from a matrix organization. Yeah. But typically, it's just a selling point, and they're great managers sometimes, but sometimes it's not to see you grow, it's to throttle your growth so you don't outshine them.
Exactly. That's exactly what I see that all the time. It's I'll support you to a certain point.
Yes.
But if you're going to take over my job, I'm not going to support you. I mean, But
isn't that the job of a mentor?
It is to build you up, to help you grow, to develop you, to sort of push you along.
Yes.
That's what you shouldn't be threatened by that.
And if I surpassed you at that company or somewhere else, that means you did your job well.
Exactly. But I think women are absolutely threatened by other women, and it's really sad. Now, fortunately, I've seen that change recently.
Mm-hmm.
I'm part of the Global Council for Responsible AI, and it is mainly women. And the woman that started the Global Council is a woman by the name of Carmen Mars. She's incredible. She is a big supporter of women, and she just can pull together women from all over the world. So I mentioned I was just in Lake Como. We had representatives from every continent of the world was at this, and it was women supporting women. It was sisterhood. I mean, there were men there too, and the men were great, but it was primarily women in very prominent positions in regions of the world that you wouldn't think that women would hold CISO positions or CEO positions. And it's just fascinating, and it's so wonderful to have that sisterhood where nobody was jealous of anyone. Everybody was happy and applauding everyone. And if you write a paper or you publish something or there's an article on LinkedIn, they're the first ones that are going to mention you and give credit. I mean, it's just a phenomenal group of women.
Thank you for sharing that because I think people need to hear it. Yeah. And I needed to hear that too because, we say we want to champion for everybody, but sometimes we don't applaud others back.
Exactly.
And then you wonder why people don't applaud for you.
Exactly. But this group is just incredible, just absolutely incredible. And really, we need more women like Carmen in this world to do that. She's pulled together the Global Council for Responsible AI. She has the United Cybersecurity Alliance, which is the one that just had these Women of the World Award. And I, in my wildest dreams, never thought I would meet women from certain jurisdictions that you hear that women are treated like second-class citizens that hold very powerful positions and are absolutely brilliant and very supportive of each other.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing. When you were early into your career, you have said that you were being dismissed or feared was a sign that you were doing something right.
Exactly.
Can you share a moment that comes to your mind when your voice was minimized or when you were overlooked and how you persisted?
Yeah, there's probably several of those.
The one that stands out.
So I did work for the defense industry at one point in time, and
that must have been interesting.
That's a very male-dominated environment, and trying to do privacy law in a global defense company is very difficult. I was trying to explain to executives, and in the defense industry, the executives and the customers are going to be the military.
Yes.
So you've got all of the heads of the military department there, and there was a meeting at the Pentagon, and there was individual brass from all over the world, and it wasn't just U.S. military; it was global. And I was talking about the importance of privacy and the respect for fundamental privacy, and I would get pushback of well, we're in war, we don't care about privacy, and I mean, it was like
That's not even top of mind.
like I wasn't
Yes.
even talking about war. I was just talking about the fundamental right to privacy and respect, and what we have to do in our systems and the data we collect. More about the employment part, and everything I said was a challenge, and everything I said I would get feedback of like, this doesn't make sense. Well, this doesn't relate to us. This doesn't relate to us. And I can still remember this. I finally just, got quiet and looking out at the stage, and I said, so tell me what's important to you, not as military brass, but as a human being, what's important to you? And nobody could answer that. It just went dead silent. And so when
Because you brought it down to the basic level.
to the basic level. So
that's always the hardest thing for people to
exactly.
answer.
And they got completely quiet. And so I said, somebody better say something, we're going to call on you. So and that's the way I present. It's like I try to make it fun too, because I say if you're on your phone, you better be tweeting about what I'm talking about. Otherwise, you're going to be standing up here with me. And I'll call on, so I'll say, sorry, am I interrupting your nap time? Are you? And that kind of engages people. So I called on someone and I said, tell me what's important to you as an individual, as a human being, not as a part of the military, not living in this country, whatever the country was, but tell me what's important to you. And he thought about it for a while, and he finally came back and he said, my family. And I said, so how would you feel if your family's personal information was splashed all over the newspaper? And he said, I'd be angry. And I said, well, that's what I'm trying to get across to you.
You have
Simple.
to bring it down to the basics.
Simple.
And Sheila, in hearing you talk it, and while preparing for this, I realize too that when it comes to privacy, it has been women leading the charge. And it isn't until something heinously unjust has been done to us that is a violation of something that is so private to us that we start to champion for changes. And a perfect example would be Erin Andrews.
Oh,
I believe was it 2013 or 2016 memory.
Yeah,
Somewhere around there. And, she really showed us that how imperative it is. And we have come a long way now in terms of technology and all these other things. And the attacks have just gotten bigger and more intrusive.
Absolutely. I mean, she was really scrutinized and bullied by a lot of people for coming out.
And it takes a lot of willpower
exactly.
to continue to show up, to fight for what you believe in.
Absolutely.
When you have the larger populace bullying you.
Exactly. For her to come out and share what happened to her
yes.
was incredible. I gave her so much credit.
Yes.
And she really opened the eyes of a lot of people to say, this is happening. And then you hear about a lot of celebrities that, pictures that were taken in private were now being exposed on social media. Social media, in many ways, again, pros and cons, has been the downfall of privacy, because everything is splashed on social media, whether you want it or not. And that, I always tell my nieces and nephews, think before you post.
Yeah.
It's like, because you're never going to get that back. And especially when they were still like in high school or they were in college in particular, in your college and your party days.
Yeah.
You don't want to be posting that stuff on social media, because a prospective employer can go in there and look at it.
Yes.
And I remember one nephew goes, no, I mark everything private. I said, no, you might mark it private, but your friends who have access to it and their friends have access to it. It's a domino effect. It's never private. I mean, it's kind of like, I never thought about that.
And I got to bypass that, thankfully. Yeah. But, to your point about social media, I'll say this quickly, is I have a private page, but it is so small that if something leaks out, I can go through my list of people because I can identify it.
Exactly.
Now, the number of people I follow could be in tens of thousands.
Exactly.
But the people who follow me are so small. And that's okay, because it's my digital album.
Yeah.
But by the same token, it is mine with my loved ones to protect. And I'm not going there for validation or how many likes I get. It is a memory. And so that's why the number of people who have access to that is small enough for me to be able to, if something bad happens, to quickly identify who the bad actor potentially could have been.
Yeah, no, you're smart. And as I said, I'm not anti-social media.
Yeah.
You have to use it smart. You have to be
Yes.
smart about it.
Yes.
And you have to decide what's out there and also understand whatever's out there is always going to be out there.
Is it possible to design AI systems that are ethical from the start? Because ethic is a big part of this as well.
Absolutely. So, as I mentioned, I'm a global ambassador for the Global Council for Responsible AI. And part of what we're doing, our mission, is to help organizations and companies that are developing and deploying AI to look at the trust, transparency, and ethics around the use of AI. AI has been around for a while, but it hasn't been as prolific as it is now. And certainly with, everyone using it, ethics is something we're just now getting into and building and writing standards and guardrails around how it should be used. So it's going to take organizations like, the Global Council for Responsible AI, UNESCO, and other global organizations that are really focused on what are the standards around AI, the EU AI Act, some of the new legislations that comes out, to really force organizations to think about the ethical and trust. Because once you break the trust, you're not going to get it back.
Right.
And once your customers have lost faith in you, forget it. They're gone. And so we're just at that infancy stage of really looking at how do we build ethical guardrails around the use of AI. And one of the things that I always start with is, as you start to embrace the AI culture, whether it's deployment or development, as much as you possibly can, do it without personal data. So if you want to use AI to build a template,
can we do it without personal data?
You can in some ways,
Okay.
depending on what you want to use it for. If you want to build a template, you want to summarize a document. Well, then put in terms of your prompts that you can't use any sensitive data, you can't use any personal data, or you have to minimize what you can do with it. Or think about, one of the things you have to think about is the AI model is only good as it is that day, because whoever built that model is using the information they have that day.
Yeah.
So you're relying on whoever built it, you're relying on whatever information they had to build it. And so you always have to keep the ethics in there, human intervention. Human intervention has to be a major part of the AI technology. You can't just rely 100% on AI. Plus, data protection laws require you to have human intervention. You can't use machines to make determinations on individuals without human intervention. So that's something I can always fall back on when I'm talking to an organization and say, well, you can deploy that AI, but you'll be in violation of the data protection laws because you have to have human intervention.
And they're marketing it to us as we don't need human intervention.
Exactly.
Anymore.
But you always have to have human
I
intervention.
agree.
Yeah.
I agree. Profiling becomes the price of access. Have we already normalized the next surveillance state?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if profiling is normal, then people start to accept it and they stop questioning it. And once you're profiled, everything is under surveillance. But I go back to the laws again, though. So if you look at data protection laws, you aren't allowed to monitor the behavior or performance or activity of an individual without their knowledge. So when you're profiling, you are monitoring the behavior of an individual, and so you're already in direct violation of the law. But most companies don't care.
So if privacy is the price of convenience, what does that make us, consumer or captives?
Ooh, wow, interesting. I want to say it's kind of a combination of both. Yeah.
Fair? That's
Yeah.
fair. And I know that was a loaded one.
Yeah, that's a loaded one. Wow. Yeah.
Okay, so I have I have a few questions. So let's make it a rapid fire round.
Okay.
In your opinion, what country is doing privacy better than most people expect, and why?
South Korea, because they have one of the most restrictive data protection laws in the world, and yet it's also reasonable.
Regulation quietly reshaping things, but no one's watching.
Regulation's that's a good one. Probably the new AI acts.
But we're not paying attention to it right now?
Not really. People are still ignoring, especially the EU AI Act. People are still ignoring.
A cultural lens on data or dignity the West should learn from.
I'm sorry, say that
A
again.
cultural lens on data or dignity the West can learn from?
Oh, I would look at the EU.
Still the EU?
Yeah, I'd still look at the EU.
One habit we urgently need to unlearn when it comes to privacy.
That privacy is not the same thing. Security is not the same thing as privacy.
What's your definition of digital dignity?
It's when the ownership of the personal data belongs to the individual to whom that data relates to.
What's the next digital rights issue no one's ready for?
I think it's all the biometric information that is being collected and the use of iris scans and fingerprinting and everything. I think it's becoming more prolific.
Okay. Where will responsible AI fail first and why?
In the space of privacy and ethics, because no one's paying attention to that. Well, I shouldn't say no one. I'm paying attention to it. A lot of people aren't.
And in your opinion, which industry needs to wake up in regards to privacy?
Ooh. There's a lot of them, but I'd say technology, high tech.
Could you expand on it?
I think high tech because they're so rapidly developing new technology that privacy is still an afterthought in many ways.
And if AI can make decisions about you but isn't accountable to you, can it ever be responsible?
No.
Are privacy laws really enough, or are we mistaking paperwork for protection?
Privacy laws just on the books is not enough. Enforcement is what's needed. Enforcement of those laws.
Okay. Thank you. And I also want to say, you shared something with me that, you have been passionately speaking about this for decades. This has been your career and, shall I say, a lifelong mission. And it wasn't until recently that you got recognized for your work for privacy, not for security. So, congratulations.
Thank you.
I am so happy for you. And, it's well-deserved. I think probably long overdue.
Thank you very much.
As well. And thank you for joining me for this very important discussion on privacy. As I mentioned, we talk a lot about security, but privacy is not about secrecy. It's bigger than that. It's about your freedom.
Absolutely.
And freedom today is being rewritten in codes, contracts, and quiet compromises. Thank you for showing us, Sheila, that it's not about data, to really champion for the things that you believe in, even if you may be the odd one in the room, because if not us, then who? Thank you for being here, for taking the time to educate us on privacy. And what advice would you have for the viewers about privacy as we wrap this up?
I give the same advice all the time, is understand that you own your personal data. The organization you share that data with never owns it. They're stewards of that data. Protect it wherever you can. Ask the questions about, why do you need my data? What are you doing with it? How long do you maintain it? Be passionate about it. Embrace technology, but do it in a very transparent, trustworthy, and ethical way. Okay. And if you have any questions, reach out to me.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll catch you guys in the next episode of Between Us.